There are some things that the mind refuses to accept until they are standing directly in front of us. One such thing is SCP-49. To look at this entity is to look at a ghost from a forgotten era. It stands roughly 1.9 meters tall. At first glance, it appears to be a man dressed as a medieval plague doctor. It wears the heavy, dark robes and the stark ceramic mask of those who once walked through the streets of dying cities. Yet, this appearance of clothing is an illusion. As researchers discovered, SCP-49 is not actually wearing any garments. Those thick robes are not fabric, but a hide that has grown directly from its own body over time, nearly indistinguishable from the form beneath them. And the mask is not ceramic. It is a type of chitin that has sprouted from the bones of its face. Underneath this biological shell, X-rays confirm there is a humanoid skeletal structure. But whatever lives inside that skin is not human. SCP-49 can speak many languages. It often speaks English or medieval French. It is generally cordial. It is cooperative. It carries itself with the air of a professional, a man of science. It always carries a black doctor's bag on its person. This bag is an anomaly in itself. Its interior is seemingly larger than the exterior. From this void, SCP-49 can pull out surgical instruments and objects that should not possibly fit within such a small space. But there is a darkness beneath the courtesy. There is a sudden, violent switch that can be flipped. SCP-49 is obsessed with something it calls the Pestilence. It refers to it as the Scourge, the Great Dying. To this entity, the Pestilence is an unspeakable horror. It is a disease of immense concern, one that has shown its true face many times throughout history, and will do so again. The tragedy is that no human researcher knows what the Pestilence is. There are no symptoms that our medicine can detect. There is no biological marker. To us, the world is healthy. To SCP-49, we are walking corpses, riddled with a rot that only it can see. When SCP-49 believes it is in the presence of the Pestilence, its behavior shifts. It becomes irritated. It becomes aggressive. If left unchecked, it will attempt to kill anyone it perceives as infected. The method of execution is instantaneous and terrifying. Through direct skin contact, SCP-49 can cause all biological functions of an organism to cease. The heart stops. The lungs freeze. Life simply vanishes. Autopsies of its victims have been conducted, but they are always inconclusive. There is no poison. There is no trauma. There is only a sudden, absolute silence of the body. Following these deaths, SCP-49 frequently exhibits a sense of regret or frustration. It insists that simply destroying the host does little to actually eradicate the Pestilence itself. And so, it begins its work. SCP-49 will open its black bag and perform crude, hurried surgeries on the corpse. These procedures are not always successful, but when they are, they create something known as SCP-49-2. These instances are reanimated corpses. They are husks of what they once were. They possess no memories. They have no mental functions. They move with a slow, ambulatory gait, driven only by basic motor skills and response mechanisms. Their physiology is fundamentally different from any understood human biology. Yet, SCP-49 looks at these shambling things and smiles. It remarks that the subjects have been cured. The world first learned of this entity in the town of Montauban, in southern France. Local authorities had been investigating a series of disappearances. During a raid on a local home, they found several instances of SCP-049-2, and they found the doctor. While law enforcement fought for their lives against the hostile reanimated corpses, SCP-049 did not interfere. It stood back. It watched the engagement with clinical detachment. It took notes in its journal. Once the creatures it had made were dispatched, SCP-049 willingly entered custody. It was brought to Site-19 and placed in a standard secure humanoid containment cell within Research Sector 02. The Foundation attempted to understand the entity through dialogue. Dr. Raymond Ham was one of the first to interview it. The conversation began with an air of mutual respect. SCP-049 was delighted to find that Dr. Ham was also a man of science. It laughed at the idea of being abducted by street thugs, feeling relieved that it had been brought to a laboratory. But as the interview progressed, the entity's obsession became clear. When asked about the Great Dying, SCP-049 did not speak of the bubonic plague. It didn't even know what that was. To SCP-049, there is only one ailment that exists in the world of men: the pestilence. It spoke of its duty to rid the world of this scourge. It claimed it was very close to developing a perfect cure. The cure to end all cures. When Dr. Ham pointed out that the reanimated creatures recovered from the house in France were no longer human, SCP-049 merely glared. It admitted the cure was not yet perfect, but it insisted that with more time and further experimentation, perfection would be reached. SCP-049 requested its own laboratory. It requested assistance. It viewed the Foundation not as captors but as colleagues in a grand scientific endeavor. For a time, the entity remained compliant. It was granted the corpses of recently deceased animals for study. This became a routine part of its containment. Every 2 weeks, it would be provided with a bovine or another large mammal. The researchers watched through the glass as SCP-049 worked. The process was meticulous and bizarre. It would spend days operating on a single subject. Then, regardless of whether the creature reanimated, it would spend several more days documenting its findings in a thick leather journal. These journals are written in a language that no linguist or codebreaker has ever been able to decipher. There were moments of strange curiosity. SCP-049 once operated on a goat and remarked that its veterinarian practice was rudimentary, but the patient had responded well. Then there was the orangutan. Because of the similarity between primate and human physiology, SCP-049 was deeply invested in this subject. It reanimated the creature several times, only to find itself dissatisfied. It returned to the corpse 5 separate times, attempting to refine its method. When it finally failed, it turned the body over for incineration. It called the failure a stumbling block on the road to the cure. The most unsettling observation occurred during the surgery of a bovine. SCP-049 began by embalming the corpse. It then produced several long syringes containing dark, viscous fluids. It called these the essences of the humors. It explained that the pestilence brings about a systemic imbalance. To heal the patient, one must first bring the humors into balance, or the body will reject the cure. SCP-049 spent 8 days adjusting the internal organs with large metal instruments. Finally, it used an electric cattle prod to strike the corpse in several locations. The bovine reanimated. It became ambulatory, but it was a nightmare of flesh. Its head had been inverted. Its limbs had been reoriented. When Dr. Ham questioned why this mindless drone counted as a cure, SCP-049 grew agitated. It spoke of rotten timbers in a house. If a beam is rotting, you do not leave it. You pull it out and replace it with something untouched by rot. To SCP-049, the bovine was now strong. It was clean. It was free from the terror of disease. The entity genuinely believed it was offering a mercy. It viewed the Foundation's confusion as short-sightedness. It believed that we were simply unable to look past minor setbacks to see the salvation taking place before our eyes. For months, this fragile peace held. SCP-049 was cooperative. Dr. Ham continued his interviews. But the entity's patience was wearing thin. It began to express a growing desire for living human subjects. It claimed that its cure was of little use on dead flesh. The breaking point came on April 16, 2017. Dr. Ham entered the test chamber for a routine interview. As he stepped inside, SCP-049's demeanor changed. The entity grew anxious. It asked Dr. Ham if he was feeling well. Following protocol, Dr. Ham ignored the question and reminded SCP-049 that the interview was required. In an instant, the courtesy vanished. SCP-049 attacked. He killed Dr. Ham with a single touch to the throat. Because of a lapse in security, and because Dr. Ham had no time to activate the emergency system, his body lay undiscovered for 3 hours. By the time security entered the room, it was too late. SCP-049 had already performed its surgery. Dr. Raymond Ham had been converted into an instance of SCP-049-Ts. When Dr. Theron Sherman later interviewed the entity, there was no apology. There was only a cold, hard conviction. SCP-049 did not see the event as a murder. It saw it as a rescue. It claimed that the pestilence had crept into Dr. Ham in an unforeseeable fashion. It insisted that it had detected the disease just in time. To SCP-049, killing Dr. Ham was a mercy. It believed it had saved him from a horror we cannot comprehend. Dr. Sherman screamed that Ham was now a vegetable. SCP-049 responded with disdain. It called the Foundation's staff men of emotion rather than men of science. It spoke of the millions who had succumbed to the pestilence throughout history. It claimed it was the only one capable of casting down the plague once and for all. As the interview ended, SCP-049's voice shifted. The arrogance faded into something more desperate. Its breathing became labored. It repeated over and over that it had saved him, that Dr. Ham had been sick, that we are all sick. It claimed that it is the cure. 3 weeks later, Dr. Elijah Itkin conducted a final investigation interview. He asked if SCP-049 felt any remorse for the death of his colleague. SCP-049 waved its hand dismissively. It admitted that the death of a fellow doctor was regrettable, but argued that in the face of the pestilence, one must be swift. One must act without hesitation. The entity had spent the intervening weeks compiling new notes. It had constructed a new theory on how the pestilence could infect someone as insidiously as it had infected Dr. Ham. But the most chilling part of the conversation was the conclusion. SCP-049 stated that it had gleaned all it could from the supply of animal corpses provided by the Foundation. It concluded that living human subjects were the only way to proceed forward. It expressed a firm desire to tend to those still living who suffered from the disease. When Dr. Itkin told the entity that such a request would be denied, SCP-049 did not argue. It simply laughed. Because of this incident, containment procedures were drastically altered. Order 049.S19-Teen.1 was issued. SCP-049 is no longer permitted to interact directly with any members of Foundation staff. It is no longer provided with corpses for its surgeries. This order persists indefinitely. The entity remains in its cell at Site-19. It is kept sedated during transport and bound in a Class 3 humanoid restriction harness. When it becomes aggressive, the scent of lavender is used to calm it. It sits in the silence of Research Sector 02, waiting. It knows that we are here. It knows that we are breathing. And in its mind, it knows that every single one of us is rotting from within.